Hey everyone, welcome back. Imagine this. A maid, desperate and timid, ends up sharing a bed with her cruel and stunning mistress. But here's the cage. The mistress sees her as nothing more than a dusty, poor servant. So what happens when their bodies touch and emotions they've buried for so long come to the surface? Let's dive in and find out. Nicole.
Elena worked as a maid in Sophia's grand house, though worked was a polite way of putting it. She endured Sophia's endless temper, her sharp tongue, and her constant cruelty. Every day was a battle to avoid her wrath, and every day Elena fought to stay invisible. She had to. She had to. Her young daughter and aging mother depended on the little money she earned here. Elena knew she wasn't educated enough to find another job, and even if she did, it wouldn't pay enough to support her family. She was trapped, and Sophia knew it. Sophia was beautiful, though, stunning in a way that made Elena's head spin, no matter how awful she was. She was tall and elegant, with piercing blue eyes and a figure that seemed sculpted to drive people mad. Her confidence only made her more magnetic, and even when she was cruel, she held an irresistible power that Elena couldn't stop craving. That was the problem. Sophia was not just Elena's employer or tormentor, she was Elena's obsession. And Sophia made sure Elena knew her place every chance she got. One morning, Elena was in Sophia's bedroom, cleaning up after her. She carefully folded Sophia's clothes and placed them back in the closet. But then she found a pair of Sophia's black lace lingerie tossed carelessly on the bed. For a moment, Elena froze. She couldn't stop herself from picking them up, holding them in her hands. The lace was soft, expensive, nothing like the plain cotton underwear Elena owned. The thought of these delicate pieces pressed against Sophia's skin made her chest tighten. Her fingers brushed over the fabric, imagining what it would feel like to touch Sophia that way, to be the one slipping these off her. She shouldn't be thinking these things. It was dangerous, wrong, but the thoughts came anyway.
Her gaze wandered to Sophia's bed. She imagined her mistress lying there, half covered in those sheets, her golden hair fanned across the pillow. She pictured Sophia's body, the curve of her waist, the arch of her back, the way her legs would look tangled in the sheets. The fantasies were bold, vivid, and they came unbidden every time she stepped into this room. Elena wanted her so much it hurt. But she also hated herself for wanting someone who treated her like dirt.
She was still holding the lingerie when she heard the sharp sound of heels clicking against the marble floor outside the bedroom. Her heart dropped, and she quickly shoved the lace under the pile of folded clothes. Sophia swept into the room like a storm, her silk robe clinging to her body in a way that made Elena's stomach tighten. The thin fabric barely covered her thighs, and the deep V of the robe showed just enough of Sophia's skin to make Elena's mouth dry. But Sophia's face was thunderous. "Elena!" she barked. "What is this mess? Do you think this is acceptable?" Elena's cheeks burned as she stammered, I'm sorry, mistress. I was just what? Standing around gawking like an idiot? You can't even fold clothes properly?" Sophia's voice was cold, biting. "Do you know how lucky you are to have this job? I could replace you tomorrow if I wanted to. God knows someone else could actually handle these tasks."
Elena lowered her head, her hands trembling. "I'll fix it right away, mistress," she whispered, her voice barely audible.
"You'd better," Sophia snapped her brow, "and next time, don't make me repeat myself." She turned on her heel, her robe shifting as she walked away, giving Elena a glimpse of the smooth skin of her legs. Even after such harsh words, Elena couldn't stop herself from staring. Her gaze followed Sophia's every movement, drinking in the sway of her hips, the way her body moved with such effortless confidence. It was maddening. How could someone so cruel be so desirable?
Later that evening, Sophia called Elena into her bathroom to help her prepare for the party she was attending with her husband, Victor. Victor had been in a foul mood all day, but then again, he was always cruel to Sophia and to everyone else. He treated her like an accessory, barking orders at her the same way Sophia barked at Elena. Still, Sophia seemed to reserve her worst anger for Elena, perhaps because she had no one else to take it out on.
Sophia stood in front of the mirror, her robe slipping off one shoulder. "Run the water," she ordered, not bothering to look at Elena. "And make it quick, I don't have all night."
Elena obeyed, turning on the taps and adjusting the temperature. When she turned back, Sophia had already let her robe drop to the floor. She stood completely naked, her back to Elena, her long legs and bare skin illuminated by the soft light. Elena froze. Her breath caught in her throat as her eyes drank in the sight before her. She knew she shouldn't look, but she couldn't stop. Her gaze trailed over Sophia's shoulders, down the curve of her back to the roundness of her hips. She could feel the heat rising in her face, but she couldn't pull her eyes away. Sophia caught her staring in the mirror and raised an eyebrow. "Are you going to stand there all night, or are you going to help me?" Her tone was sharp, but there was a faint smirk on her lips as if she enjoyed seeing Elena squirm.
I'm sorry, Mistress," Elena stammered, stepping closer to help. Her hands shook as she handed Sophia a towel to wrap around herself, but Sophia didn't take it. Instead, she stepped into the tub, letting the warm water cascade over her body. "Wash my hair," Sophia commanded, leaning back against the edge of the tub, "and don't be clumsy about it this time."
Elena knelt by the tub, her fingers trembling as she reached for the shampoo. She poured it into her palms and worked it into Sophia's hair, her fingers brushing against her scalp. She tried to focus on the task, but her eyes kept wandering to the water dripping down Sophia's body, tracing the lines of her neck, her chest. Her heart raced, and she felt heat pooling in her stomach. "Faster," Sophia snapped. "Do you think I have time to sit here all night while you fumble around?" Elena murmured an apology and worked quicker, though her hands were still shaking. She hated how Sophia treated her, but she couldn't deny the thrill she felt being this close to her. Her fantasies would only grow bolder after tonight. Replaying every second of this moment, imagining what it would be like if Sophia's sharp commands turned into something softer, something more intimate. Victor, meanwhile, was yelling from the other side of the house. He and Sophia had been fighting more often lately, their voices carrying through the halls. Elena overheard them every time. Their fights were explosive, and though Elena tried to stay out of it, she was always dragged in one way or another. When Sophia finished her bath and called Elena to help her dress, she took out all her frustration on the maid. "You're useless," Sophia hissed as Elena zipped up her dress. "If you don't learn to do things properly, I'll send you packing. Do you understand me?" "Yes, mistress," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. But even as the humiliation burned in her chest, her eyes lingered on Sophia's body, the way the red dress hugged her curves. She hated herself for it, but she couldn't stop wanting her. When they left for the party, Elena was left alone in the house, her mind racing. She lay in her small bed thinking about Sophia's body, her touch, her voice. In her fantasies, Sophia wasn't cruel. In her fantasies, Sophia wanted her just as much as she wanted Sophia, but fantasies were all she had.
And when she finally fell asleep, they were all she dreamed about. That night, Elena drifted into a restless sleep. Her small, hard bed in the servants' quarters was nothing compared to the luxury of the master bedroom, but it didn't matter. In her dreams, she wasn't in this cramped little room. She was in Sophia's bed, wrapped in those silken sheets that smelled faintly of jasmine. And Sophia was there with her. In the dream, Sophia lay close, her body pressed against Elena's. Her skin was soft, warm, and her golden hair fell over her shoulders like a halo. Elena's hands, trembling at first, grew bolder as they slid over the curves of Sophia's body, the swell of her hips, the smooth line of her back. She could feel Sophia's breath on her neck, could hear her soft sighs as Elena's fingers traced every inch of her skin. For once, Sophia wasn't cold or cruel. She was warm and inviting, her lips brushing against Elena's ear as she whispered, "You're mine." Elena felt her chest tighten with a mix of longing and disbelief. She had never felt anything so vivid, so real. In her dream, there were no barriers between them, no harsh commands, no cruel insults, no social boundaries. There was only Sophia, her body pressed against Elena's, her hands exploring Elena in return, her voice low and husky as she said things Elena had only dared to imagine. It was perfect. It was everything Elena wanted, but could never have. But the dream shattered suddenly, torn apart by the sharp, angry voices echoing through the halls. The sound of Sophie and Victor screaming at each other brought her back to reality. She sat up, her breath shaky, and listened. Their fights were common, but this time it sounded worse than usual. Carefully, Elena slipped out of bed and padded down the hall, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. She couldn't stop herself. She stopped outside the partially open door to the living room and pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear every word. "You're disgusting, Victor!" Sophia's voice rang out, sharp and furious. "You don't even bother to hide it anymore. A business trip with your secretary. How stupid do you think I am?" Victor's laugh was cold and mocking. It's none of your business what I do, Sophia. You're my wife, not my keeper. And maybe if you weren't such a bitter, frigid woman, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere. Frigid? Sophia spat, her voice trembling with rage. You have the audacity to call me frigid when you haven't touched me in years? You treat me like a trophy, like I exist only to make you look good. Don't act like this is my fault. You're lucky I still keep you around, Sophia. You think you're so special? Let me remind you. Without me, you're nothing. Elena's breath hitched. She peeked through the gap in the door and saw Sophia standing her ground, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Even in her anger, she was stunning. Her dress clung to her body, her hair was perfectly styled, and her blue eyes burned with fury. Victor, towering over her in his tailored suit, looked every bit the cold and controlling man he was. The tension crackled between them like a live wire. Nothing. Sophia's voice shook, but there was fire in her words. You think I need you? I could leave you anytime I wanted. Victor's response was swift and brutal. He slapped her across the face, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. Sophia staggered, one hand flying to her cheek, but she didn't cry out. She stood frozen for a moment, her breathing ragged, before lifting her chin defiantly. Elena's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Her heart raced as she watched from the shadows, torn between the urge to run in and help Sophia and the fear of being caught. She stayed rooted in place, her eyes wide as the scene unfolded before her. You'll regret that, Sophia hissed, her voice low and venomous. But Victor didn't even flinch. He straightened his jacket, adjusted his tie, and grabbed his suitcase from the corner of the room. I'm leaving, he said coldly. Don't wait up for me, and don't bother calling. I'll be busy. He strode out of the house without another word, slamming the door behind him. For a moment there was silence. Sophia stood there, still as a statue, her hand resting on the cheek Victor had struck. Elena wanted to move, to say something, but she was frozen in place, unsure of what to do. Finally, Sophia turned and stormed toward the staircase, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Elena barely had time to dart back down the hall and into her room. She closed the door quietly and leaned against it, her chest heaving. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger at Victor, sympathy for Sophia, and something else, something darker. Seeing Sophia like that, vulnerable, angry, but still so strong, only made Elena's feelings more intense. She hated Victor for what he had done, but part of her wanted to comfort Sophia, to be the one Sophia turned to in her moment of weakness. Elena climbed back into bed, but sleep didn't come easily. She couldn't stop thinking about the fight, about Sophia's trembling voice, about the way her body had looked in that dress as she stood her ground against Victor. And, as always, her thoughts drifted to what it would be like to hold Sophia, to kiss the anger from her lips, to run her hands over the body she had only dared to imagine. But Sophia wasn't hers. Sophia didn't even see her, and tomorrow Sophia would go back to treating her like dirt as if none of this had ever happened. Elena sighed, staring at the dark ceiling. She was trapped in more ways than one. Trapped in her job, trapped in her feelings, and trapped in this impossible longing for a woman who would never love her back. But she couldn't stop wanting her. Even as the first light of dawn crept through the window, all she could think about was Sophia.
Victor had barely been gone for an hour, and Sophia was still seething. Her cheek still stung from his slap, but what stung more was the humiliation of it. She hated him. She hated the way he talked down to her, the way he flaunted his affairs, the way he treated her like a possession he could toss aside whenever he pleased. And now he was gone, off with that secretary of his, while she was left behind in this hollow, suffocating house. The rage swirled inside her like a storm, looking for an outlet. That outlet, as always, was Elena. Elena was in the living room, tidying up after the fight. She worked quietly as she always did, trying to stay invisible. But in her nervousness, she accidentally bumped into a side table. A porcelain vase, one of Sophia's favorites, wobbled dangerously before crashing to the floor, shattering into pieces. The sound echoed through the room, sharp and unforgiving. Elena's heart sank as she froze in place, staring at the broken shards. She barely had time to react before Sophia stormed into the room, her eyes blazing with fury. "What have you done?" Sophia snapped, her voice like ice. "Mistress, I am so sorry," Elena stammered, her face pale. She dropped to her knees, scrambling to pick up the pieces. "Sorry?" Sophia hissed, advancing on her. "Do you think that fixes anything? Do you have any idea how valuable that vase was? Of course not. You're too stupid to understand. You can't even manage simple tasks without ruining something." Elena's hands trembled as she gathered the broken shards. She tried to swallow her shame, tried to stay quiet like she always did. But Sophia wasn't finished. "You're a fool, Elena, a stupid, useless maid. I should have fired you a long time ago. I don't even know why I keep you around. Do you think I need someone like you here, breaking my things, making my life harder?" Elena stopped. Her hands froze mid-motion. The words stung worse than usual, but this time she couldn't stay silent. She couldn't take it anymore. "That's enough," her eyes meeting Sophia's for the first time. Sophia blinked, momentarily stunned by the defiance in Elena's voice. "What did you just say to me?" "I said, that's enough," Elena repeated, louder this time. "I've had enough of you taking your anger out on me every time something goes wrong in your life. Every time Victor humiliates you, you come to me, looking for someone to blame. I've done everything I can to be a good maid, but nothing I do is ever good enough for you." Sophia's face darkened. "You dare speak to me like this?" "Yes," Elena said, her voice trembling but strong, "because it's the truth. I don't deserve to be treated like this. I've put up with your insults and your cruelty because I needed this job. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to lose my only way of supporting my family. But I'm done. I won't let you humiliate me anymore." Sophia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her pride wouldn't let her back down, not even for a moment. Her voice shook with rage. "You're nothing but a maid. You don't get to talk to me this way. And you're nothing but a bitter, angry woman who takes her problems out on everyone else," Elena shot back. The words escaped before she could stop them, but she didn't regret saying them. The slap came quickly, sharp and hard across Elena's face. The force of it made her stumble back a step, her cheek stinging. "Get out!" Sophia snarled, her voice low and venomous. "Pack your things and get out of my house." Elena didn't argue. She didn't beg or plead. She simply nodded, her face expressionless, and turned to leave the room. She walked back to her small quarters with quick, deliberate steps, her head held high. In her room, she grabbed her bag and began packing her few belongings. Her movements were calm and methodical, but inside her heart was racing. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had never spoken to Sophia like that before, and the consequences didn't matter. For the first time, she felt free. When she finished packing, she walked back to the main house. Sophia was still standing in the living room, her arms crossed, her expression cold and unforgiving. "So, you're really leaving?" Sophia said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Yes," Elena said simply. "I just wanted to thank you before I go. Thank you for giving me this job, Mistress. It's been hard, but it allowed me to take care of my family. But it's time for me to leave now." Sophia's eyes narrowed. "You'll stay until tomorrow morning," she said sharply. "You're not leaving tonight." "No," Elena replied, shaking her head. "I don't want to stay another minute in this house. I'm leaving now." She turned toward the door, her hand resting on the handle. But before she could open it, she heard Sophia's voice crack behind her. "Wait," Sophia said, her tone completely changed. Elena hesitated. She turned back slowly and was shocked to see Sophia's face. The pride and fury were gone, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. Sophia's eyes were wet with tears and her lips trembled as she spoke. "Don't go, please." Elena stood frozen, unsure of what to say. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I know I've treated you horribly, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't know why I do it. I think I'm just so angry all the time. Angry at Victor, angry at myself. And you're always here, and I take it out on you because I don't know how to deal with it. It's not fair. I know it's not fair." Elena stayed silent, her hand still resting on the door. "I don't want to be alone tonight," Sophia said, her tears falling freely now. "Victor's gone, and the house feels so empty. Please, Elena, stay. I'll make it right, I promise. Just don't leave me." Elena's chest tightened at the sight of Sophia breaking down in front of her. For so long she had seen Sophia as untouchable, cold, cruel, and proud. But now standing there in tears, she looked small, almost fragile. After a long pause, Elena sighed and set her bag down. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll stay. But only if you promise to treat me better. No more insults. No more taking your anger out on me. I promise, Sophia said, wiping her eyes. I'll change. I'll try. For the first time, Sophia's voice sounded honest, and Elena believed her.
Elena couldn't bring herself to leave Sophia alone after everything that had happened. The sight of her mistress breaking down had shaken something inside her. Sophia, who had always been so strong, so cold and untouchable, now looked fragile and lost. "Come with me," Elena said softly. Sophia looked up at her. "You shouldn't stay here like this. Let me take you to your room. You need to rest." When they reached Sophia's bedroom, Elena opened the door and led her inside. "You should lie down," Elena said quietly, moving toward the bed to pull back the blankets. Sophia followed, sitting on the edge of the mattress with a sigh. "I'll leave you to rest," Elena murmured, her voice trembling slightly as she began to turn away. But Sophia stopped her. "No, stay." Elena froze, her heart skipping a beat. "Stay?" she repeated. "I don't want to be alone tonight. The room is too quiet, too dark without Victor here. Just stay with me, just for tonight." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Come on," she said softly, patting the space beside her. Elena hesitated for a moment before climbing into the bed, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure Sophia could hear it. She kept to the very edge at first, afraid to move too close, afraid of what this meant. But Sophia shifted onto her side, her back facing Elena, and the warmth of her body pressed against Elena's was enough to make her mind spin. "Good night," Sophia murmured, her voice low and quiet. "Good night, mistress," Elena whispered back, though she knew sleep would be impossible. Minutes passed, then an hour, and Elena lay there, wide awake, her thoughts racing. Sophia's presence was overwhelming, the warmth of her body, the soft scent of her hair, the sound of her breathing as it slowed into the steady rhythm of sleep. Elena couldn't help but stare at her, her eyes tracing the curve of Sophia's back, the way the silk fabric of her nightwear clung to her form. She stared for what felt like an eternity, her fingers gripping the sheets tightly, trying to stay still. But when Sophia shifted again, rolling slightly toward her, their thighs brushed together under the covers. The contact was brief but electric, and Elena froze, her entire body tense. Sophia didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she didn't pull away. She expected Sophia to tense or shift away, but instead she stayed perfectly still. Emboldened by her mistress's stillness, Elena's hand slid further, her palm skimming the curve of Sophia's lower back, where the robe clung tightly to her figure. Her fingers moved down instinctively, grazing the soft dip of Sophia's hips where the fabric hugged her form. Her hand moved without her even realizing it. Slowly it reached out and brushed against Sophia's waist. Emboldened, Elena leaned closer. Her lips brushed against Sophia's mouth, just for a second, just the lightest of kisses, but it was enough to send a jolt through her entire body. Her eyes widened as she realized what she had done. She pulled back quickly, her face burning with shame. She couldn't believe it. What had she just done? She stared at Sophia's still form, praying she hadn't woken her, but then Sophia's eyes opened. She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking into Elena's. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Sophia's expression was unreadable. Shock, confusion, something else Elena couldn't quite place. "What was that?" Sophia asked finally. Elena's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her mind was blank, her heart racing so fast it felt like it might burst. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to explain what she had just done. I'm sorry," she finally stammered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to. I wasn't thinking." Sophia continued to stare at her, her gaze piercing. Elena's hands trembled as she sat frozen in place, unable to look away. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. Nothing between them would ever be the same. Elena's hands began to tremble as her words stumbled out of her mouth in a desperate apology. "Mistress, I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice shaking. "I wasn't thinking. I don't know what came over me. I didn't mean to. Please forgive me." Her heart raced as tears welled in her eyes, her body frozen in place. She couldn't believe what she had just done. The kiss had been a moment of weakness, an uncontrollable surge of longing that had overtaken her. Now she was certain this was the end. Sophia would never forgive her. She would lose her job, her home, and everything she had worked so hard to keep. But Sophia wasn't responding. She sat there, completely still, her expression frozen. Her eyes stared at Elena with an intensity that made Elena's chest tighten. There was no anger, no immediate retaliation, just shock. Sophia's lips parted slightly, but no words came. Instead, she seemed lost in her own thoughts, her breathing uneven as she stared at Elena as if seeing her for the first time.
Does she love me? Sophia thought, her mind spinning. Is that what this is? Is that why she's looked at me the way she has? Is that why she trembles when she's near me? She couldn't look away from Elena, her maid, her servant, so small and timid, yet so bold in that one fleeting moment. The touch of Elena's lips lingered on hers, soft and tentative, yet filled with something Sophia couldn't quite grasp. Desire? Longing? Love? Her mind raced as her eyes darted over Elena's face. She saw the fear in her eyes, the trembling of her lips, the way her hands shook as she twisted her fingers together nervously. But beneath that fear, Sophia saw something else, something that made her heart beat faster. She wants me. She's always wanted me. The realization struck Sophia like lightning, sending a wave of heat through her body. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts, but the more she tried to process what had just happened, the more she felt her composure slipping. The room felt too quiet, the tension too heavy, and Sophia felt like she was on the edge of something she couldn't name. "I'm so sorry, Mistress," Elena whispered again, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to. Please, I'll leave if you want me to. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." Her words only made Sophia's heart pound harder. Elena's voice was full of shame, but there was something else in it too, something vulnerable, something that made Sophia's chest ache. Sophia opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on Elena's trembling form, and in that moment she made a decision she didn't fully understand. Before Elena could say another word, Sophia reached out and grabbed her by the wrist, pulling her closer with a force that made Elena gasp. "Mistress, Elena started, but her words were cut off as Sophia's lips crashed against hers in a kiss that was anything but gentle. It was rough, desperate, and demanding. Sophia's hands moved to Elena's face, holding her firmly in place, as her lips claimed hers with a ferocity that left Elena breathless. For a moment, Elena froze, her mind unable to process what was happening. But then the heat of Sophia's kiss, the pressure of her lips, the softness of her skin, it all became too much. Elena surrendered, her body melting into Sophia's as she kissed her back just as fervently. Their bodies pressed together, the thin blanket slipping away as Sophia pulled Elena closer. The warmth of Sophia's body seeped into Elena's, and she could feel every curve, every inch of her mistress against her. It was overwhelming, everything Elena had dreamed of but never thought would happen. Sophia's hands moved down Elena's back, pulling her even closer until there was no space left between them. Elena's fingers, timid at first, found their way to Sophia's waist, tracing the smooth line of her body through the thin fabric of her nightwear. The silk clung to Sophia's skin, and Elena's touch grew bolder as she ran her hands up her sides, feeling the softness beneath her fingertips. The kiss deepened, turning into something raw and electric. Sophia's hands tangled in Elena's hair, pulling her closer as their lips moved together with an intensity neither of them could control. Elena's heart raced as she felt Sophia's body press against hers, their breaths mingling, their skin touching. For so long, Elena had dreamed of this moment, of feeling Sophia's body against hers, of tasting her lips, of being wanted by the woman she had adored from afar. But nothing could have prepared her for the reality of it. Sophia was everywhere, her scent, her touch, her warmth, and it was more than Elena could handle. Sophia pulled back suddenly, just enough to look into Elena's eyes. Her cheeks were flushed, her lips swollen from the kiss, and her breathing was ragged. She stared at Elena for a long moment, her expression unreadable, as if trying to make sense of what she had just done. "Elena," she said softly, her voice trembling. She didn't finish the sentence. Elena's chest tightened. "Mistress, Don't call me that," Sophia interrupted, her voice still quiet but firm. "Not now." Elena swallowed hard, her hand still resting on Sophia's waist. She didn't know what to say, didn't know what this meant or what would happen next. All she knew was that she didn't want to let go. Sophia leaned in again, her forehead resting against Elena's. Her eyes closed, and for a moment they just stayed like that, breathing together, their bodies pressed close, the tension between them thick and undeniable.
I don't know what I'm doing, Sophia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't even know what this is. Elena's fingers tightened on Sophia's waist. Neither do I, she said honestly, but She hesitated, her voice trembling. I've wanted this for so long. I've wanted you for so long. Sophia's breath hitched at the confession. She opened her eyes, her gaze locking onto Elena's. For the first time, there was no cruelty, no walls, no masks. Just Sophia, vulnerable and raw, her emotions laid bare. I don't know what I want, Sophia said softly, her voice trembling. But I don't want to stop, not tonight. Elena nodded, her heart pounding, as she leaned in again. Their lips met once more, softer this time, but no less intense. And in that moment, the rest of the world fell away.
Desire, power, and vulnerability. Sometimes the most forbidden love is the one that changes us forever. What would you do if the person you long for the most suddenly became yours? Thank you for watching, and if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more captivating tales.